The night had left a cool film on the marble sill. Lyanna pressed her bare forearm to the stone until the skin prickled and the cold steadied her breathing. Beyond the balcony, the bay turned slate and then something lighter as dawn unstitched the horizon. Gulls lifting in ragged arcs and the tide combing a slow lace along the shingle below the city walls. King's Landing breathed in fits and starts. The cough of a distant horse, the low scrape of an oar, a woman's voice calling a name. In the chamber the curtains climbed and fell in the faint wind like patient lungs. She had not slept. The feathers of the great bed had agreed to hold her shape, but they refused to hold her mind. The bed was old, older than she was, older than Robert, older than the war. Some steward, shy with pride, had told her that queens had slept here before the dragons left the world, and it had taken a discipline she did not always possess to answer with a courteous silence. There were dents in the carved posts where rings had tapped and a seam in the canopy that had once been patched with silk a shade off, and every time the wind troubled the tapestry on the opposite wall the woven ship seemed to luff and heel like a living thing. She had watched the ship until it felt like staring at a stranger across a crowded hall. A lamp guttered by the door. The room smelled of wax and wood smoke, of camphor and salt. Someone, her dark-haired handmaid from the kitchens of Winterfell, or the southern girl with the thorn-pricked fingers, had laid her riding boots at the end of the bed, newly blacked and softly gleaming, toes slightly turned toward each other as if they were speaking in a secret language. Beside them a folded cloak waited with patient gravity. Lyanna reached for the cloak first, not because she was cold but because the weight of wool did something the bed had not done. She drew it over her night shift and sat again upon the sill. The city was still a ruined thing in places. The fire and madness of the sack had left a pattern like frost on a late leaf, a beauty that was only a trick of light if you climbed down into it. From this height, brick lines made a careful net. In the streets below, masonry was charred, beams raw-gnawed by flame showing their insides like bones. The Red Keep wore her scars discreetly, in narrow lines where stones did not match, in patches of mortar pale as a new scar. Lyanna touched the seam in the canopy again and thought, not for the first time, that she should seize the precious window of stillness before the day began and walk to the small godswood. It was no northern thing, that thicket. No face carved in a heart tree, no white bark papering a trunk like old bone. But it was water and green and the hush of leaves, and the hush was not nothing in a city where every breath had an audience. She did not rise yet. The cloak was heavy on her shoulders. Weight was an honesty the South did not often offer. Food was heavily sauced, laughter heavily sweetened, words heavily gilt. Weight was simpler. When she had been a girl, she had ridden with a pelted cloak that turned snow and rain. This wool would not, but it sat with dignity, a sort of quiet attempt to be equal to the air. Robert had snored himself onto his back, then onto his side, then onto his stomach with a hand flung open on the coverlet as if someone had struck him and he had reached to catch the blow. The bruises on his forearm were plum and tea-brown, fading toward yellow. He would call them the good colors if he noticed them at all. Battle had put a language in him that he had not yet unlearned. His beard, softer than it looked, shadowed the pillow. In the turmoil of the wedding, they had been two people standing at the axis of a country, a ceremony before the seven for the sake of the city, a binding with the gods of her house in a thicket where the air tasted of iron and slow water. And then they had been man and wife in a chamber where candles labored and the door closed, and then they had been only two bodies tired to the bone. He had kissed her with new wonder and old urgency, and sleep had come on them like an ambush. "Are you cold?" His voice was a rumble, dislocated by sleep. "I am only awake," she said without turning. "That sounds like a malady," he said. "Come back to bed and I'll cure it. Pretend there's a war again. I sleep like a year when there's a war." "No more wars," she said. He gave a soft, humorless breath. "That's your cure? We should put it on banners." She turned then. He was looking at her through lashes heavy as wet broom. The day had not yet put its shine on him. This was the Robert that boys did not imitate and servants did not whisper about. Softer at the eyes, less ablaze than a banked heat. The last months had pared off the jokes and added a quiet that was not emptiness. She had seen him break a man's grip by lifting his arm and go, still watching blood run as if listening to a song. She had not yet learned where he put the truths of those moments when he lay down and closed his eyes. "I'll walk in the God's wood," she said. "Will you go with me?" He groaned. "Before the sun does? They will say the queen has dragged the king to pray in a thicket. They will think you a witch. Do you care? I want them to think different witcheries." He pushed up on an elbow with a grunt. "I'll go," he said after a heartbeat. "But take pity on a slain hero. Let me bring mead." "Tea will do for me," she said and smiled to soften the refusal she did not give. He flopped back down. "If it's tea when one is queen, what is left for a king?" "Room to be mortal," she said. He did not answer, but his hand turned on the coverlet so that his palm faced up, and after a moment she set her fingers in it. His skin ran heat into her bones. Some sorrows, of which the room had too many memories already, loosened their teeth. It startled her. Sometimes, the simple animal comfort of another person's warmth startled her more. Tea. This, which she had refused to name for so long, now had a name and a place at her side. The wind lifted the tapestry again. The woven ship stretched and settled. "Can you feel the storm?" Robert asked, so quiet that she almost thought she had imagined his voice. "Before it happens." "Yes." "I don't," he said. "I only ever feel it when it hits. It's why I laugh, perhaps." His hand squeezed hers, once. "Go before the city wakes. I'll come when I've wrestled virtue from the bed." She left him with a kiss pressed to his brow, a gesture that felt too young for him and too old for her, and drew a second cloak over the first before she went out. The corridor smelled of damp stone and the bright, sharp scent of lemons from a bowl on an iron stand. Some lord's man had carried them across the sea as a gift. She had not yet learned which house claimed them. The lemons lay like coins in a painting, too clean for any kitchen she had known. A guard in boar-embossed cuirass straightened at her appearance, and then tried to soften the sound of his boots as he fell into a respectful distance behind her. He had a storm's end look, weathered brow like cracked bark, courtesy like a sword kept well. "I will not need escort," she told him. "We are asked to stay near, Your Grace." His voice was careful, the syllables of her title new in his mouth. She nodded. "Then walk softly." The godswood took the dawn in a gray that seemed to deepen the green and the brown. She stood with her hands tucked into her sleeves, listening to water. It ran here in a trickle from a stone lip into a pool the size of a war shield and as still as oil in the center. Leaves lay on the water like coins. The pool held the sky as if afraid it might drop it. There was no face on any trunk. The trees were common southern things. Oaks whose leaves held the glossy green of the south, drooping elms, a sycamore mottled as if it had been splashed. A pair of doves nest hissed and then cooed a thin thread of sound. Someone had set a wooden bench near the pool, an afterthought with bowed legs. She sat, knowing the bench would tilt and complain, and let her chin touch the wool at her breast. She had grown up with a heart tree that knew her. She had fed its roots with stories she had not told to living ears and pressed her cheek to its flesh and learned how its bark caught the light. It had been a mother that did not correct her and a judge that would not say aloud what it judged. And it had watched and listened with that terrifying patience only old things possess. Here there were no faces. She tried to imagine carving one. The thought made her stomach turn. The heart trees were given faces. They were not taken. She had no right to set a mouth to a southern trunk and ask it to speak. Her breath showed in a pale wisp when she let it out too sharply. It was only the hour. She could count the days until winter by her breath, but winter would not come here the way it came at home. Winter would be a word on tongues she did not trust and a festival, a reason to trim a hall, to lay more wood than necessary on a fire and then brag of smoke. The man who tended this little acre, a stooped fellow with bark-stained hands, had told her yesterday that a heart tree would not take root this far south. Not in this soil, not in this heat, not with the salt so close. "You could try," he had said, pitying her and afraid of his pity. "Sometimes they take a mind to surprise you, but the saplings don't like it. Even if it grew, it wouldn't be happy, wouldn't make sense of all this." His gesture had included the city and the sky and himself and her. She dipped 2 fingers in the water and touched them to her brow. She did not know if such a gesture was foolishness or a sacrilege. The old gods did not care for gestures. They used time for prayers. She pressed the water to her brow anyway and whispered a name that felt like a pebble in the mouth, a small solid something that could break a tooth. She whispered it again, and the pebble grew heavier. The guard had stopped at the margin of the trees, as if the shade were a border he had been told not to cross. He did not look at her. He looked at the place where the sky showed through a bare branch and made a coin of light. There was courtesy in not watching. Footsteps, heavy and not softened. The bench creaked under another weight. Lyanna did not need to turn to know who had made the bench complain so. There were not 2 men in the Red Keep who could provoke Wood to honesty so quickly and so completely. "You came before the mead," she said. "You could at least look surprised," Robert said, breath clouding like a horse's. "I have had practice knowing when you will do the thing you say you won't." He gave a laugh that might have turned loud but did not. There was a discipline in him this morning that did not accompany battle. "John Arryn sent a boy to tap at my door," he said. "He will want to talk of ledgers and bread. Gods. The word bread has too many edges. It cuts the gullet when there is none of it," she said. "The city complains?" He sounded almost hopeful. Complaint was a battle he understood. "Men complain always," she said. "But the grain stores are not what they could be. The sack emptied what had not already been emptied by poor years. The bakers are selling loaves that would rattle on a table." "Then we'll fill the stores," Robert said, as if pushing a door with his shoulder. "With what coin?" She did not make the question a challenge, only a place for him to stand and see the drop. He grunted. "Arryn has numbers. He'll conjure something. He always has. You might help him, if only by listening." He made a face at the water. "Did you walk me here to make me virtuous?" She could not help the small smile that came. "I walked here to silence all of you," she said, and he gave her a softer sound that was not quite laughter. They sat. The doves murmured. Far below there was faint shouting, a boy's voice in the practice yard, one she did not recognize yet, full of the raw metal shriek boys have when they learn to shout the way men shout. A trumpet answered with an indifferent brazen remark. He drew back from the water. "John will tell me and I'll nod," he said. "I'll swing a hammer where he points. That's what I'm for. You are for more than that." "I am for whatever you like," he said at once, and she, who had long considered herself not easily surprised, was surprised. That was when the warmth from his skin in the chamber became something else. Not smaller or greater, simply made of a different grain. He flexed the fingers of his right hand as if a grip had lately failed him. "Tywin sent a letter," he said, the words falling like boards dropping onto a pile. "He writes a good letter, the sort that says nothing and everything. He congratulates me, of course, and offers his counsel, in which he takes sly pleasure, and watches me for road and ditch. He speaks of the honor of service. Not one word about the thing he came to King's Landing to harvest." She could feel the Lannister lord inside the letter like a rigid spine inside a cloak, refusing to bend, refusing to admit a chill. "He wanted you to marry his daughter," she said. There was no cruelty in the sentence, only a willingness to say aloud what men often made more powerful by not saying. "He wanted to set his daughter on a chair. There is a difference." Robert's mouth tugged. "I have been a weapon for so long. I forget the shape of the hand that holds it." He slanted a look at her that was not soft. "I don't repent." "Well, I repent one thing. If you're going to say Rhaegar, say it without spitting," she said before he could. "I repent that I didn't break him sooner," he said, obediently without spitting. His gaze slid back to the water. "Some nights I dream I break him and he gets up and I break him again and he still gets up and then he is someone else when he stands. The face changes. Sometimes it is a face I knew when I was a boy. Sometimes it is nobody. Then I wake and there's no one to hit and I can't seem to sleep again." She listened to the pool keep the sky. When the breeze touched the surface, the circle troubled and then smoothed, as if it had decided to forgive the air. She looked at Robert. She had not promised him to never speak the prince's name. She would not make the past more delicate than it was. Delicacy, she had learned, was a veil that trapped air and made breath small. "We married yesterday," she said, and it felt like finding a piece of bread in the pocket of an old cloak. A thing you had not expected and that made you more hungry. "Let us speak of bread, then. Go to Jon Arryn. Sit and listen. He knows what coin will do and what pride will not. He will ask you to be something difficult in the afternoons and easy in the evenings. Give him as many afternoons as you can, and I will have your evenings." He made a show of peering at her. "That sounds like a bargain a merchant might threaten to keep. You don't need to love ledgers," she said, "only to love that others might eat." She did not have it in her today to make it into a speech. Everything in her that could be fashioned into speech had been spent yesterday on the heat of the sept and the cool of the thicket and the oath in her own mouth. His hand, which could break a grown man's jaw by accident, reached as if to touch her cheek and then remembered itself and settled for lifting the frayed corner of her cloak. "You know how to make me do things," he muttered. "No," she said gently. "I know how to tell you when you already wanted to do them." He blew out a breath. "I'll see him. I'll nod until my neck breaks. And you, what will you do? Sit in a chair and let the ladies teach you how to not eat? They know marvelous tricks. They drink water that smells of cucumbers and speak of one another's ankles. I will learn the house," she said, "which way it leans when it rains, whose hands burn the bread and whose forget the salt, what the guards say when they think their words turn to smoke before they reach anyone's ears, what child lifts a spoon to a baby's mouth before lifting it to his own. I will ride the stables. I will walk the kitchens. I will learn the names of the cats if the cats will let me. You will walk the kitchens in a cloak like that and they will fall on their faces," he said, although the scorn was only armor for his pride in her. "I will take off the cloak," she said, "and I will find a way to lay a piece of the north in this place without offending anyone who loves their gods too well to have them insulted by a poor imitation. I'll plant you a tree if that's what you want," he said, stubborn. "We'll bring one from Winterfell in a wagon and feed it on the blood of bulls and the tears of bakers and the faces of men who tell me the weather. The gods can grow where I tell them to grow." "You would break the wagon wheels on the first hill," she said, and he smiled without quite wanting to. She listened to the city climb toward noise. She would need to write before the day stole the chance. The words had sat behind her teeth all night, pushing at her tongue. She had written once already, in a cold room where a blue flower had shaken petals loose like snow, while her brother watched her try to put promises into a shape that would not betray itself. There was another letter now that she owed, another not to pull tight. The letter would be short. Long letters sniffed out their own danger. She turned her palm up to the sky's brightness and imagined it could hold a weight, the small weight she had held once and could not hold again. She closed her hand before the light slipped out of it. "You're walking away from me?" Robert said, suspicion sharpening his tone as if she had already stood. "I'm thinking 3 steps ahead of you," she said mildly. "It is not the same." He studied her, the serious look that made his F.A. C handsomer, which she would not tell him. "Stay," he said in a different voice, and something at the base of her throat unclenched. "I did," she answered, and they both knew she was not speaking only of the bench. By the time they left the gods' wood, the city had shrugged all the way into itself and the morning stung like a whip. The corridor had found a maid with a polished bowl to set where the lemons were, and the light through the glass left a lemon's shadow sharp as a coin's edge on the wall. Outside the windows, men were shouting at men whose job it was to carry stone up stairwells too narrow for 2 men to pass. Somewhere a horse crushed straw. Jon Arryn waited for Robert in a long chamber that had once been used to store casks of thick wine, the air still smelling faintly of raisin and beryl. He was a spare man and carved finer than most of the Southron lords. Lyanna had already learned to distinguish. Their gold as obvious as a bell and their temper as nervous as a bell. Jon wore a grave kindness like winter light. She could imagine boys growing up under it the way saplings grow under a kind but unsentimental sun. He bowed to her and did not make a performance of it. When his back straightened, no piece of him seemed to believe it had done a clever thing. "Your Grace," he said, including Robert with the smallest of glances. "We need to speak of bread, and of ships." "Speak," Robert said with outward good humor and inward patience, "as you would square a stubborn horse." Jon's hands were clean and unadorned when they folded on the table. "The sack has left streets broken and stores light. It has also left mouths. The men who came to fight for our cause remain to look for work. Winter will not press them as it presses in the north, but hunger will. We must lay in grain before prices climb into foolishness and the bakers get new ideas about what a loaf is. Ships would be simpler than wagons, but the harbor is not yet fully our own. We have need of a master of ships who will not think of the work as a punishment." Robert's eyes had either learned to be heavy or were practicing it early. "Stannis," he said with the happiness of a man setting down a weight that he knows, in 2 minutes' time, will find its way back onto his shoulder. "Your brother has virtues in abundance," Jon said dryly. "He lacks one only when there's sport in the lack. He will inventory every nail in every yard. He will count the nails again to check whether they have dared to multiply in the night. He will make men as angry as good work makes them. It will suit. Let him have it," Robert said. "Give him Dragonstone as well." He glanced at Lyanna as if to make sure she was listening to him do the work. "And ask, no, don't ask. Command those Tyrells to send what grain they can spare from the reach. If Mace needs flattery instead of command, flatter him and then command him." Jon's mouth made the tiniest motion at the word flatter. "I will draft letters that accomplish both." Lyanna leaned in her chair, feeling the curve of the wood at her spine. "What would you do with the wagons, my Lord Hand?" she asked him. "Tax the grain gently at the gate." Jon returned without a breath's pause and in a tone that assumed her interest as a matter of course. "Buy enough at fair price not to set the bakers to riot when we sell it back at fair price. Place guards at the bakeries not to frighten but to keep order. Keep the rules exact and posted. Post them where men can read," Lyanna said, "and where they cannot, have them read aloud in the market. Leave paper if you must. Leave a man whose job is to explain without shouting." Jon looked at her properly then and nodded. It was not flattery. It was a craftsman's respect for a good measurement. "Littlefinger will tell you he can make coin appear," Jon added. "Sometimes he can. Remember that his coin is always a promise to return something more, and that the something will be your peace." "Who is Littlefinger?" Lyanna asked, the name like a boy's joke. "A minor lord with a major nose for other men's appetites," Jon said. "He is clever. It is his misfortune and our necessity that he knows this." Robert swore by one of the 7 he could never quite put names to. Pour his cleverness into making men pay their customs and then pat him for it. "If he puts his cleverness near my wife, I'll take the cleverness out with a spoon. Honesty will keep him farther," Lyanna said, gently enough that it would not turn to an argument. She excused herself before the talk could turn to the list of warehouses and the condition of the quay. She had made herself promise that she would not sit in rooms where ledgers droned unless the ledger was a person. The steward from the north had arranged her morning with more care than the table settings for last night's meal and with less suffering. A visit to the stables, a walk through the kitchen yard, time to sit with 3 ladies selected for their high birth, clear tongues, and willingness to say yes. Lyanna meant to learn from them whether they had ever said anything else. The stables were a straight breath of air after the wine ghost of the council chamber. The stable master had hands that could lift a horse's foot and hold it long enough to win an argument with a nail. He had arranged the stalls to set the good animals where they would be seen first, a salesman's trick that needed no scolding. When he led out the tall bay, he said, "The king commissioned her when he was still only a man," and the pride in his voice called Robert by that name again even as he reconsidered it. The mare put her head into Lyanna's collarbone and breathed. Lyanna stood with the animal's breath in her, chest to chest, until her own breath slowed to match the mare's. "What is her name?" she asked without looking up. "She had none," said the stable master, which was a lie with a different name. "She will have one now," Lyanna said, and drew back to look the anima in the eyes. The mare blinked and flicked an ear with mockery. Blue bloom, Lyanna said. The bay was not blue. The mare did not care. The mare knew that names were for men to sort their minds with. Horses kept other ledgers. You'll break both your ankles riding in this yard, the stablemaster offered, a compliment disguised as worry. Stones like teeth. Take her out to the hill north of the gate if you must ride today. I must, Lyanna said, and the stablemaster did not argue again. She kept it to a walk, though the mare wanted more. The city watched her through lashes of stone and shadow. Children started after her and then remembered to keep dignity when they remembered there had been a war and that their hair had not been fully combed in a month. A woman by a fountain set down a basket and then remembered the basket would not fill itself. The city watch, in their half-shined armor, tried to arrange themselves into respectability at her passing without tripping on each other's desires to be first and seen. Lyanna could not ride in the crowded market. She left Blue Bloom in the hands of a boy who did not look at her face but watched the mare's ears as if the beast's ears were a map. The kitchen yard was a country of its own with borders you could draw in the air. One woman owned the chopping block with the wedge missing from its edge. A boy owned the rag and the bucket by the door and defended it like a little lord. Two men shared the oven and spoke to the dough, not to each other. Fat hissed in a pan and the smell made speech seem unnecessary for a few breaths. A dog lay where it would be in the way if anyone moved too quickly. Lyanna stood at a table where a girl with a burn scar wrist chopped roots into slices so even you could have used them to measure a table. You've been well taught, Lyanna said. Yes, your grace, the girl answered without pride or fear, as if naming the quality of a carrot. Who taught you? My mother taught me the knife. The woman at the tree taught me how not to waste the edges. The woman at the tree? The girl did not look up. The septa, she said after a moment. She says a potato that makes you weep when you peel it will still feed you if you cut it right. Lyanna looked toward the small cloister beyond the yard where a sept's simple tree shed leaves that were neither holy nor without value. Septa who? She asked. Septa mare, the girl said. She goes to the markets with the small purses and comes back with more than the men come back with when they have large purses. She can make soup from bones of soup. She tells us that fat is not a sin when it keeps a baby quiet. Lyanna would find this septa mare. She would talk with her about coins that grew in the turning of a spoon. She said as much to the steward, who breathed a relieved yes, your grace, at discovering that the queen had taken up an interest that could be praised without worrying about which lord it offended. By midday the hall had learned her footfall and the servants had learned how to repeat her name back to her without the question in it. She sat with the three ladies as promised and let their words tell her where the threads of the court ran. One was a cousin to a cousin, one a widow with a little salt left to spend, one a girl with too bright hair and a talent for looking at the right man at the right time. They told her what gowns could be had in the street of silk without a sack of coin, and whose daughter had said a thing in a doorway that had been heard through the keyhole by a man who did not know he could repeat it for coin. Lyanna learned as much from what they did not say as from what they said. The widow had a son too ready to duel and a debt that was too delicate to name. The cousin's cousin ate every crumb at her lips and did not know she was doing it. The girl could not keep from looking at a king she had not yet seen with eyes that could not yet believe he was a man. After she dismissed them with a pleasant sentence that promised that they might be needed again, she walked the long way back to her chamber to give herself time to let the residue of their perfumes peel off her. She wrote at the little table by the window where the light came difficult and honest, and she did not sand the ink because she did not have many words to trap. Brother, the letter said. The word went down with weight. You have my thanks. You have my forgiveness though you never asked for it. You have my understanding though I will not put that into more words here. You have my promise that the breath I am just now taking includes his name. Do not write it. Do not write, if you can bear it, anything that a boy could hold in his fist and run with in a corridor. Keep him where you know how to keep what you have always kept well in your house. Warm enough, fed enough, watched enough. Keep him where the wind has a job to do and the men do theirs without too many words. Tell your lady wife that I honor her patience. You may tell her this in your mouth's voice and not your pen's. Tell Howland that I will remember a debt and that memory is a kind of coin that does not spend down when spent. I will ask for news when I have a way to ask for it that would not insult the gods I bowed to last night. You know my hand. I have signed nothing but your name." She dried the ink with her breath and sealed the paper with wax and the small wolf ring she had brought with her, not because she had thought herself vain, but because she had not thought herself able to do without it. She looked at the seal until she knew its lines like the palm of her own hand, then called for a boy who, she judged by his scuffed shoes, knew how to run without looking back. "Do you know the ways that do not go through the courtyards?" she asked him, when he had bowed and opened his mouth and then closed it. He nodded. "Take this to Lord Eddard Stark. If you give it to any man with hair like gold, I will know." The boy's eyes widened. "Do not tell the gate what is in the letter. Tell the gate that the queen has told you to do as you are already doing." She gave him a coin he had never held before, and he nearly dropped it because he looked at it too hard. In the afternoon, the hand came himself to the queen's door and asked for a moment of her time. Jon Arryn was a patient knock. He never struck a door twice unless the door had pretended not to hear him, and then he struck it exactly twice more. She let him in, and he stood holding his hat in his hands like a farmer at the start of a conversation about weather. "Your Grace," he said again, as if he were a man who loved to get titles right. Not because they mattered more than names, but because they mattered differently. "I'll be taking the king to see his brother. If he arrives with me, it will be one less thing to apologize for. Give my greetings to Lord Stannis," she said, "and my congratulations on his new burdens. I look forward to hearing how many nails hold the city together." "He will count them," Jon said without smiling. "There is one other matter that sits in need of a place to want to become other than it is." He seemed to search his own mouth for the right shape for the words. "There are death griefs abroad," he said. "We all carry them. Some of them are Dornish. You will be their queen as well." Lyanna did not look down. She let the truth climb her face and find its balance there. "There are names I do not say," she said. He inclined his head. "Say none of what you do not wish to say to me. Hear only this. There will be men who believe they can buy peace by buying silence. There will be others who believe they can sell noise and ask for office. They will come with tears and with daggers. I have seen this before. I do not ask you to hear them. I ask you to stand where you already stand and keep the good weather as long as you can. The men who can bear weather will do the work under it." She had the sense of a man who had once been a boy that could have been knocked over by a wave and had taught himself not to be. "I will stand," she said. He bowed and withdrew, and she was only just restraining her breath again when the person she least wanted to see at her door arrived with the most perfect manners that person could have found in his apparently endless larder of manners. Varys made a small obsequious shape with his hands. He did not bow as deeply as the widow would have admired, nor as shallowly as a fool would have called insult. He performed exactly the bow that two men in the hall needed to see to calibrate their own bows when next they bowed. "Your Grace," he said. His voice was light, like a cushion offering a lap to a cat. "You are as the wind promised." "The wind is indiscreet," Lyanna said. "Oh, it has never been anything else." He allowed himself to lift his head a fraction. "I bring no troubles. I am famous for never bringing troubles." "You are famous for hearing them," she said, "and for making them heard." He folded his fingers together. The skin there was soft enough to be an insult to the lives of ragpickers and women who soaked clothes in lye. "I am as my little birds make me," he said without blinking, "and they are often braver than I am. They tell me that the city loves its queen for riding a horse in the morning with the crown barely settled. They tell me that bread will be dearer before it is cheaper. They tell me that the Lord of Coin has ideas, and the Lord of Ships will have numbers, and that the Lord of Letters—" He hesitated, as if a slight sliver of mockery had caught in his throat. "Will write until his ink runs thin. They tell me, as well, a small story which is no story, as all the best are." "Say it," she said, straightening a cup that did not need straightening. "They say that a young lord in the north came home from war with a boy who is not named. They say the lord's lady wept into her pillow and kissed her lord's hand in the morning nonetheless. They say a wet nurse whose name is not the name she used before feeds a child who will grow to wear a sword. It is nothing, you see, a small story only small men would repeat. I am merely a poor recorder of smallness." Lyanna met his eyes. It was a thing men did not often do. His brows made a courteous attempt to hold the gaze without appearing to hold anything at all. She could see the trick and the truth of it. "I have heard," she said calmly, "that in the South men will speak of a man's child as if the child were an opinion. In the North we speak of a child as if he were a fire we must keep lit. It is a gap I will try to bridge in time." "Who could resist such an instruction?" Varys said, bowing again and this time letting the bow grow a hair lazy, as if to say he had heard what she had not said. "I leave you with the smallest of requests, your grace. Keep the cat. Every palace requires at least one creature that cannot be bribed." He gestured toward the window seat, where a gray animal had poured itself into the indentation left by her earlier waking. "Her name is Rumor. When you are kind to Rumor, it feeds in your yard rather than others." "Her name is not Rumor," Lyanna said. "Her name is as you will, then. You are the queen." He left her with her own breath and with the knowledge that he had taken the measure of it and gone away holding an account in some pocket she could not see. She found Robert in the practice yard before sunset. His hair gone dark with sweat and his face the color of the meat cook sent to the high table when she had burned one side. A half circle of men had formed that was not quite a crowd and not quite a guard. They had been watching him do a thing he loved without thinking about how they were likely to tell it at home. He stood with the great hammer too heavy for any man who was not Robert, and he told a boy to come at him with a practice sword and held a shield that had broken worse than practice swords. He let the bow land 3 blows and then seized the boy around the waist with his empty hand and lifted him from the ground and laughed into the boy's shock, so that the laughter filled the yard and turrets like geese lifted out of the grass and flew in the sound. He set the boy down, breathless, and clapped him on the shoulder with a gentleness Lyanna had not known he could aim so precisely. When he turned and saw her, something eased at once and tightened together, as if he had been leaning against a railing and the railing had turned out to be a person. He handed the hammer to a man whose wrists plainly hated it, wiped his face with the hem of his shirt like a farm boy, and came. "They say I am not to drink all the ale," he said. "It is apparently to be used as a building material. Stannis says so. His mouth becomes smaller when he speaks of ale, like a purse. Like that purse will keep a coin from flying away if clamped hard enough. He will sleep with his numbers tonight. May I have my evening?" "You may," she said, and offered him the piece of bread she had saved from her own meal because it had not been as bad as the rumor in the kitchens had suggested. He ate it as if it were not symbolic and still good bread. "Come," he said. "There's a wind on the east walk. We can see the bay pretend to be the sea." They walked with no one permitted to walk close behind them. That was the king's will, and no guard in the city had a taste for telling the king no to that, least of all when he had sweat in his hair. The wind did what he had promised. The water made a coin of the last light and then softened it into chalk. Ships sat like careful handwriting in the distance. Someone played a flute in a street that rose from the shore, the notes carrying on the rising air as if the wind were curious and lifted the sound to see what it was. He leaned on the parapet with both elbows, reminder of the boy who had learned to lean that way on his father's wooden fence. For a long time they spoke the way men in the north sometimes speak when the sky has taken their attention and they do not need to be seen speaking, with little words to keep the evening from believing it is alone. "Jon will go home," he said eventually, and she knew at once which Jon he meant and did not need him to add Aaron's name. "And Ned will go home later. He is still paying debts in the south where there are debts more than there are dues. He will want the cold," she said. "He has been too long without it." Robert made a face. "They say the north makes men quiet," he said. "It has made your brother quiet, and it has made Stannis louder because he is angry that he must be quiet to be heard. And Renly has butter on his tongue now that he has come south. He was only a boy. Now he is a boy with ideas. I don't know which of those I should be proud of." "Pride is cheaper than regret," Lyanna said. He squinted at the water. "Then let me be rich," he said, and she laughed in spite of herself and felt the laugh settle in her bones where sleep might settle if it knew the trick of it. "You will go north," he said into the wind. "With me. We'll ride over the neck and you will tell me when I should stop saying the word marsh because the word makes a fool of me." We will lay a hand against your father's stone, and we will tell your mother the foolish things and not the sad ones. We will bring your brother's lady something from the south that is not a jewel and not a story. I will hold court in Winterfell and judge a pig-stolen case between two men with ears bigger than reason. They will not forgive me for being Southern, and I will not forgive them for being honest. It will be heaven. You paint it well, she said. You always paint the things you want as if canvas remembered you once were a boy with chalk. I will paint it until it's true, he answered. At their backs the red keep breathed and shifted. A candle flared and died. A door somewhere tried to speak and spoke only to its hinge. He watched the water a moment longer, then turned so that his hip pressed the stone and his shoulder pointed at the last of the light. I have done a bold thing, he said. I thought it bold for a long time. Now I think it is only the thing I needed the courage to do. Tywin will be angry at me with that quiet anger that keeps books. The Martells will count their dead every morning and name me out loud in the counting. Viserys lives, they say, and Daenerys breathes. And I am the king who allows breath to the thing he hates. I did not know that was a skill. It feels like a trick more difficult than hitting a man hard enough that he is nothing. Breath is not a favor, she said. We remove breath with reason or with madness. We do not pluck it like a petal to see whether the day likes us. He studied her, and the look was heavy without being cruel. He did not love you, he said, and the sentence was not a kick. It was a plank set across a gap he meant to make safe. She knew her face then. She knew what it managed not to do. He loved a song, she said. I made one of the verses fit for a time. Then the song ended as songs do. Do not ask me to put it on the spit again and turn it until it is brown enough to eat at a fair. It will never be food. He nodded. He could not help the violence in him, but he could aim it sometimes elsewhere. The wind tugged at his hair, showing the widow's peak time had begun to sketch there with a gentle pencil. When they came to her chamber, a boy was waiting with more straightness than most boys could manage. He had the look of a scribe's son. Ink in the creases of his knuckles, patience as a habit. He held out a small tray. Upon it lay a piece of paper folded into a shape that did not belie its plainness and sealed with a round of wax without a device. From the west gate, your grace, he said timidly. From a man with eyes like a hard day. Stannis, Robert muttered. But when she cracked the seal, the hand that looked up at her from the page was not Stannis's angry discipline, nor Jon Arryn's careful slant, nor any clerk's tidy vowels. It was as familiar as the cut of her own nails. She read the words twice before she breathed, and then the breath that came went two ways at once and hurt both ways. Sister, the letter said. It suited him, the unornamented start. I received your hand. I have done as asked. The babe looks at no one as if he owed us anything and at everything as if it were owed, which is as it should be. He eats like a soldier. He sleeps when a soldier could. My lady sends respect and submits that a man should never be made to carry a secret if he cannot help it. I have told her there are secrets that keep the house warm in a winter more real than any in a song. She loves me enough to call me wrong when I am wrong and loves me enough to be wrong with me when I am not. Come lightly if you come. The godswood is intact. The heart tree is listening. There is a new fox that has taught itself not to fear me. I have named it Bold. Your brother. The paper had the smell of wood smoke on it still. She held it, and the smoke, and a picture of a fox that did not fear and thought perhaps, for a suspended instant, that she could bear all this. The weight would not grow lighter, but she was learning where to put her feet when she carried it. Good news? Robert asked, trying not to appear curious, which he could not do because curiosity in him was too large to hide. His attempt made it more endearing for failing. My brother says the foxes are bold, she said, and folded the letter until it was small and placed it where letters lived when it was dangerous to have them living at all. That night the wind took the tapestry hard enough that the woven ship dented the shape of a wave into its own edge. Robert slept with his arm flung over his eyes like a man who wanted to shut out not light but sight. She lay on her side and watched the shadow of the bedpost slip down the ceiling and thought of the little pool holding the sky and of faces that had none and of trees that would not be forced to speak. From somewhere outside came the exact cry of a metal thing dropped on a stone thing, and then the apology of a voice, and then the shuffle of work resumed. She let her hand lie open on the coverlet. The cat that had not been named Rumor jumped up with a soft declaration, turned twice, and arranged itself against her ribs. The warmth was outrageous. To accept it was to admit to a weakness she could not afford, and she accepted it nonetheless. She slept. In the morning, the city had invented a new noise because men had stood in a room at night and agreed on the shape it should take. The new noise was the reading of rules. It began in the markets and then took to the streets as boys with voices like trumpets climbed barrels and read the posted paper with all the gravity of men saying names at a funeral. Men began to argue about the rules at once. A woman in the meat market called out the words to men who could not leave their goats. A baker tried to sell a loaf that could have been used as a weapon and was made to eat half it himself, which shamed him properly, which made his wife put flour on his face as if he were dough. The watch stood with their staves like thoughtful shepherds and only occasionally made men remember what a staff could do when it was not thoughtful. It looked like order because it was order's first cousin. Lyanna stood on a gallery and watched. It had taken more work than an order from a king and less work than a miracle. "Are you pleased?" Jon Arryn asked at her shoulder, not looking like a man who expected the answer to flatter him. "I am less worried that bread will be a weapon by noon," she said. "I am more worried that it will be a weapon by nightfall. We should not be fools about how quickly men help us." "The fools are already at market," he returned. "They are shouting the prices they will regret in an hour. Littlefinger is in 3 places at once. Stannis is a hammer. We will need to give as much attention to the ships as to the loaves." "Then give it," she said, and did not tell him to acquaint the king with every piece of grit that fell into the gears, because she wanted the king's shoulders to learn what they could bear and not to break at once. She walked the Street of Sisters with 2 women whose names she had learned now and a boy who returned the courtesy she had shown him by pointing at stalls that would not cheat her. She bought a hair ribbon and thought herself too old for it and bought it anyway and put it in the pocket of her dress like a talisman against a day when she might not be able to remember how to be plain. She bought apples that tasted like home if home had been less stern. She stepped around a pile of stones that had been a wall and now were an object lesson and watched 2 children teach each other to climb and thought of another child who would learn a different climbing under a different sky and then stopped herself from thinking further because there are places in the mind where thinking is only a way to stir ashes. At the corner where the potter kept his marigolds, there was a man whose jaw had been broken badly and set badly and had healed into a map of obstinacy. He had a box with a lid. The lid was open. From inside came a sound that needed to be called a flute and did not deserve the name. He played, and the tune entered the air without shame and lay down on the stones and made itself comfortable despite not having been invited. People stopped not because the tune was good, but because the tune showed them how to be brave about being the sort of people who could be stopped by a tune. Lyanna listened, and after a few breaths she could hear the true song inside the broken song. And she understood, a little better than before, why men would rather follow even a bad music than none. By the time the sun lifted into the fallen notch of noon, she had ID enough to her head to need to set it down. She set it down in the small cloister where Septimere took her tea from a chipped green cup and watched the women of the kitchens count eggs. The Septa's hands were red and edged in white. She did not hide them. She watched Lyanna with a frankness that turned out not to be impolite, only uninterested in the politics of polite. "I am told you can make soup from bones of soup," Lyanna said with a half-smile that invited the woman to answer in kind. "I can make soup from the idea of a bone," the Septa said, "but I prefer to make soup from the bone itself." "I would like to learn your prayers," Lyanna said, "the ones that turn thin things into food." Septimere sipped and set the cup down and nodded. "I will teach you the one that goes, 'Please, gods, let there be enough salt and not too much.' It is an old prayer and useful. And perhaps the one that goes, 'Please, gods, let the pot not crack today because it is the only pot I have.' This one is older. And if the pot cracks, then I will show you what to do with a cracked pot," the Septa said, and the sentence landed in the air between them, heavy but not sharp. On the 3rd day, Howland Reed came, though he came without a name and inside a man whose clothes did not fit him, and whose face looked as if a marsh had decided to become a face and had not quite worked out the trade. Lyanna saw him in a corridor where men did not expect to see anyone of consequence and could not help the noise her breath made. He lifted a finger, soft as the ripples on a mirror. The guard at her shoulder did not look. Reed glanced at the guard's very deliberate inattention and let a smile bend his face into several new shapes. They met in the little room near the old armory where the lime wash had flaked away to reveal stones that had been held together by a faith that time would not pry them apart. He closed the door and stood with his hands behind his back like a man who knew how to make a spear of quiet. He had not changed except by growing more into the thing he had always been. "Your Grace," he said, and the courtesy in him did not sound like something borrowed from a court. It sounded like something he had found in a wood and washed and offered as if it were meat. "You are safe?" she asked, and he tilted his head. "No one is safe," he said, as if reciting a thing the Reeds had long ago decided. "But I am quiet." And she could say the name in front of him. He had saved more than her life and more than a secret. The child. "He laughs at leaves," Howland Reed said unexpectedly. "He laughs at shadows and then laughs more when the shadow goes away. He puts his fist in my beard without asking, which I accept. I am only waiting for him to learn that my face is a face. Until then, I will be his reedbed." Lyanna felt a tightness behind her eyes that she did not intend to indulge. "Is he? But of course he is. Alive?" Howland asked with a ghost of mischief. "He is extravagantly alive. There are men in this house who hear everything that is not said," she warned. "I brought nothing with me that they can hear," he returned. "And I will leave nothing. Tell my brother," she stopped. There were so many ways to make the sentence a trap. "Tell him that I stood in a place where there is no face on any tree and I spoke a name aloud by the trees all the same. Tell him that I am learning how to be two things at once. A woman whose hands are not empty and a woman whose hands are not full. Tell him nothing else." "I will tell him all of that and no less," he said. He looked at her as a man looks at a bright thing that is also sharp. "You will need allies who are not men of the court," he said. "You will need men who do not clean their nails with knives for show. Bring me reeds," she said. "Bring me quiet men with patient eyes. They are slow to love a city," he warned, "because cities do not stop moving long enough for a man to find where he is. I will teach the city to hold still," she said, with more hope than reason. And Howland Reed did not laugh at her, but he did smile, which in him meant much. When he had gone again into his borrowed man and the door had closed as if it had always been meant to close on that moment, Lyanna sat for a little while with her hands empty and her heart not. Then she stood and went to the yard where the king was learning something that made him curse politely. She listened to him curse and she did not correct him, because she was learning that in the South correcting a man in the wrong way made him decide only to be wrong more stubbornly and loudly. She greeted Stannis with respect for his numbers and did not make a joke, and something like an unadmitted gratefulness flickered across his set mouth as if it did not have permission but had broken the rule anyway. She led Renly to the stables and made him hold Bluebloom's reins while she spoke to a boy about how to cinch a saddle correctly and not as if the saddle and the boy were enemies. Renly watched with the rapt impatience of a boy at a feast. He would be handsome, Lyanna thought, as if that were information she could write in a ledger and subtract from his faults. At supper, the king told a story badly and made everyone love him for it, and the queen ate bread that tasted almost like bread for the first time since she had come to the city. And when she set down her cup and wiped the wine from her lip, she looked toward the dais where the Lord of Coin was watching her watch the room, and she let her face become very simple and very unattractive to men who think they know women, and Littlefinger, if that was his name this week, looked away first. Jon Arryn noticed. Jon Arryn's glance was as good as applause. And in the night, she woke to a wind that had found a crack in the window casement and made a small clear note like a boy teaching himself a new tune and not yet getting it right. She lay on her back with the cat heavy as a stone on her ankle and put her arm over her eyes like the man beside her and told herself a story she could sleep inside. In the story, she planted nothing and everything grew anyway. In the story, the city ceased to listen for the wrong songs. In the story, a boy put his fist in a man's beard and learned to laugh when the shadow went away. Morning stole in without consent. She took it anyway. The ledger of the day was waiting, with entries she already knew and entries she would only learn when a man at a gate told her the sort of truth that requires a woman to hold it without letting it bruise. She put on the cloak, not because she was cold but because weight is a sort of courage, and she went out to teach rumor to eat where she could watch it, and to teach men to read rules, and to stand where the wind came in, and to carry her names in a mouth that would not betray them. She would be careful with her words. She would be lavish with her looking. She would make of her hands a way to keep a fire lit in winter and see that the pot did not crack if she could help it. If it cracked, she would learn again what to do with a cracked pot. She would keep the cat. She would keep the boy in her breath and not write his name. In the yard below, the trumpets tried a tune twice and then gave it up as too complicated for men who had not yet remembered how to trust ceremony. The watch clattered in their new practice of courtesy like men who had put their boots on the wrong feet. A man in white moved along the balustrade of the outer court, bare head shining in the sun. Ser Barristan Selmy, who had stood before other kings and had kept his oath through fires, lifted his gaze to the gallery as if he could feel a pair of eyes on his crown. When their eyes met, he did not bow or smile. He let the small, necessary truth they shared sit between them. That we make of our vows a kind of country, and we live in it not because it is green or easy but because it is ours. He was the first to look away, not because he was ashamed but because he was a man who had learned how to let a queen turn her face without feeling watched. It was a worthy lesson. She would learn it, too, for the sake of those she would need to look at her and not lean their weight on her gaze. She had asked for this. She had not asked for this. Both sentences could sit in her mouth without quarrel. She put on her gloves. The leather was new. It would learn the shape of her hands. The hands would learn the weight of a city. She went to meet the morning, and it regarded her with the blunt curiosity of a child, and she did not pretend it was anything else.